Just after 3 o'clock this morning, a driver believed to be dead ramming his truck into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter, killing at least 10, hurting more than 30 others, including 2 police officers we opened fire on. They were shot. They are in stable condition, we understand. And there is also that investigation into a homemade bomb as well. I want to bring in now NBC News Justice correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, we're getting one of the first images of what allegedly appears to be the pickup truck involved here. I want to show it to people here. You can see it, that white pickup truck. The police superintendent said this driver was hell-bent on carnage. And you can see it there, Ken.
Yeah, I can't see the picture you're showing, Hallie, but I've seen other photos that show a white, what looks like a Ford F-150 pickup truck with Texas plates. And that will tell the authorities a lot. They'll be able to run down the provenance of that truck, the ownership history, potentially where it pinged on toll transponders. They will determine exactly where that truck has been in recent hours. And no doubt, it's very likely they know the identity of this suspect and are now running down social media connections, talking to relatives, trying to determine a motive here in a case that, again, to recap, the FBI is saying they are investigating as an act of terrorism. That doesn't mean they've determined it is terrorism, but they are investigating it as a potential act of terrorism. And clearly the authorities are saying that this man intended to kill as many people as possible. This was not only a vehicle attack, he then shot 2 New Orleans police officers, and the FBI is saying there were potential bombs, potential improvised explosive devices. So a complex attack that appeared to have taken a lot of planning. And again, you're seeing this white pickup truck with Texas plates that was instrumental to the attack, Hallie.
And Ken, as we know, President Biden has been briefed. The Attorney General Merrick Garland has been briefed on this. You talk about the FBI investigating this as an act of terror here. Explain why that is more than simply a semantic distinction, why that's critical moving forward.
Yeah, well, and you knew that it was a huge deal when you saw the FBI in the initial news conference of the day stand up and say, we're taking control of this investigation. And the local police chief and the mayor essentially said, we're handing this off to the FBI. They would only do that if they had evidence that this was more than just a local matter, a personal grievance. Obviously, they knew it was intentional right away, but there's something that they saw that made them think that this was potentially terrorism. That doesn't necessarily mean an overseas connection. It doesn't mean ISIS-inspired, although we have seen ISIS-inspired vehicle attacks in Germany and in New York City over the years. It's potentially related to domestic extremism or potentially, sort of a motive that we can't divine right now. But the FBI taking the lead because they believe that there are indications here of a terrorist motive here, somebody that wanted to inflict mass casualties to make a point, to send a message, some political or ideological point. That's sort of how the FBI thinks about terrorism, and that's what they're looking at right now.
It is possible, Ken, and you alluded to this, but to be clear and to say it explicitly here, it is entirely possible that law enforcement knows who this driver is, even if the rest of the public, journalists, for example, do not. At this point, this investigation could potentially encompass not just the city of New Orleans, not just the state of Louisiana, but multiple states across wherever this investigation may lead.
Of course, that's absolutely right, Hallie, especially because we're seeing a Texas plate on this truck. So that obviously expands the perimeter of this investigation, at least to Texas. But yes, I mean, we've seen this before, sadly, too many times. The FBI and partner federal agencies are now running down every speck of digital dust that this person has left online. And we all have online fingerprints and footprints that we leave. Whether he had an active social media profile or not, they will determine a lot of information about this subject. And because he was deceased at the scene, it's very likely that they do have an identity through fingerprints or potentially a wallet in his pocket or potentially the plate that they're able to run on the truck. And so, yes, there's no doubt that they know a lot of information. Hopefully, they'll reveal at least some of it at their 11 a.m. briefing, and we'll get more clarity on exactly what was motivating this event, Alan.
Yeah, that briefing's set to begin just about 2 hours and change from now, where we expect to see more updates. Ken, one of the things that we're looking at now, and some of these images coming in, we've seen the pickup truck now. We've seen that very short clip. It's just about 4 seconds long of people running. It appears to be the immediate aftermath of this truck ramming. You can hear in the background what sound like gunshots going off. That would place that moment, and you're seeing it here, maybe 3:14, 3:15 in the morning. Obviously, people on the street wrapping up after the ball dropped at midnight in New Orleans there in the early morning hours. It is very scary to watch. And as we heard from an eyewitness who was on this street, he ducked into a nightclub when he heard some of this commotion happening up the street. He says when that car raced down the road, he said, plowing over people, something like 8 to 10 blocks at a very, very fast clip. Part of this investigation is going to involve how that car could have been on that road, how it managed to get through several of those blocks, considering how packed the French Quarter was at that point.
Yeah, that's a huge question. And obviously, you know, when this happened in 2017 in New York City, the NYPD completely reevaluated how it secured crowded scenes downtown and began deploying heavy trucks, sand trucks and dump trucks at particular events to try to prevent this kind of thing from happening. It's difficult to second guess the security posture in a place like New Orleans, Bourbon Street, where people have been gathering in large crowds for more than a century, and nothing like this has ever happened before. So clearly, you know, they weren't thinking about this kind of possibility. They didn't have the kind of barriers that would have prevented this kind of thing from happening. But you can't fully prevent something like this. That's why it's so horrific. It's just really the most chilling sort of attack, because it's people when they least expect it are celebrating, and they're gathered in a city where they expect to be safe. And, you know, there are vehicles all around, and this person had ill intent and was able to overcome whatever barriers they had. That's certainly going to be a question going forward, though. And you can imagine next year when when people are gathering in Bourbon Street, there will be a much different security posture. Unfortunately, this was a hard lesson that this city had to learn, and hopefully other cities will be looking very closely at how this happened.
Ken Delanian, thank you very much. I want to go now to Gabe Gutierrez, one of our NBC News senior White House correspondents. And Gabe, we're learning in just the last few moments that it sounds like President Biden has spoken with the mayor of New Orleans at least once today already, right?
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Now, President Biden has been briefed on the situation here, according to the White House, and as you said, has spoken with the mayor of New Orleans. Now, President being briefed by not just FBI officials, but also senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security, and the White House says that he will continue to be briefed throughout the day. Now, the president right now in Wilmington, Delaware, after ringing in the new year there. He attended a private wedding ceremony last night, and he is scheduled to depart for Camp David a little later on today. Now, we are here in South Florida near Mar-a-Lago, where President-elect Trump celebrated the new year here with a party at his estate. We have not yet heard from the Trump transition yet, but we have reached out. But again, that news that President Biden has spoken at least once so far with the mayor of New Orleans and plans to continue receiving briefings here throughout the day. Hallie, as you know, one of the roles for the president, not just commander-in-chief, but consoler-in-chief. And we have not yet received word on whether or when we might get any official statement from President Biden. So far, the White House has not shared any details on any changes to his schedule at all, or whether he might plan to address the public at all as he departs for Camp David. Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez, live for us down there in South Florida. Gabe, thank you very much. We'll check back in with you if we hear anything else from President Biden or from the White House in the hours to come. Let's go back now to former Secret Service Special Agent Evie Pomporis, who's joining us now live. And Evie, in the lingo of law enforcement, if you will, this is what you call a soft target, right? Explain the difficulty in protecting these kinds of places, like what we're seeing and what we saw overnight in the French Quarter.
Anytime you have an open area like this, multiple ways in and out, it's a soft target. You know, and as we're watching the video footage, and I've been paying attention and jotting notes down, you don't really see any hardened security perimeter. You see those white and orange half boards. Those are actually called parade barricades. They do nothing. You can kick that over with your foot and it falls down. I see some bike rack. Again, it's easily movable. I understand that there was police presence. They had about 300 plus officers. Here's the thing, when you're dealing with a vehicle, driving like that, it is a very difficult thing to stop. A car is a weapon. A car is a weapon. We are very fortunate that he actually crashed his vehicle. Otherwise, he would have done more damage. And I do want to push slightly back. I respect my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, but you are New Orleans, and this is for everybody out there. We are major cities. You've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And I keep hearing, This has never happened here. We just saw this, was it 2 weeks ago, happen in Germany. When these things happened in other places, in Germany, there was a man who deliberately drove his vehicle, bypassed their barricades, deliberately drove through a Christmas market, killing 5 people, injuring almost 200 people. We must pay attention to these. We have to have imagination when it comes to law enforcement. There are 17,000 law enforcement entities in the United States. When I say that, different departments, sheriffs, counties, PDs, everybody should be paying attention. Everybody should be thinking, I need to be proactive. How can I prevent this stuff? So I kindly disagree, and that this is a big event. Thousands of people, you know it's going to gather people, you know it's going to gather attention. This is not that soft of a target per se. Like, you have that awareness, and we need to do a better job securing everybody. All these departments need to be paying attention. Look what is going on outside. Look at what is happening. We have a responsibility to keep people safe and secure. Improvise vehicles, buses. I have used yellow buses, school buses to secure sites. That's right. I went to a town that didn't have the plow trucks. They didn't have sanitation. So I said, school buses. You know those big yellow school buses? Give me those. And I lined them up to create a perimeter to secure my site. It's called being creative and using our imagination. But we have a duty to people when they come to these events to feel safe and secure. And quite honestly, when I hear like, we're surprised, we didn't know, we're missing the mark there.
The superintendent of the New Orleans Police Department, when she delivered that update, the only one we've gotten officially so far, just a couple of hours ago, she said that this driver went around the barricades. Evie, to your point here about securing a site. Is it, again, there's a lot of questions here that we don't know. There is a question about some of the bollard replacement or barricade replacement that had been happening in New Orleans ahead of course, their hosting of the Super Bowl just next month now. They've got Mardi Gras coming up in a couple of weeks here. How would somebody be able to get around barricades if it was to be secured the way that you described? Or is it still possible for a motivated individual to be able to conduct an attack like this in that instance?
With a vehicle, no. If you're putting trucks, plow trucks, sanitation trucks, you're spreading them out, even RMPs, radio motor patrol vehicles, which are police vehicles, if you're using cement barricades, I'm not talking about the plastic stuff, I'm talking about something that you can't move. If you spread them out strategically, yes, you can. You know, maybe you can't do the whole area, but you can do the inner perimeter where you've got your maximum amount of people. It's doable. Why they didn't do it, I suspect, and again, I don't know. What I'm hearing, and as I heard the council person speak before in the local network, we've never had this before. We didn't expect this. We're surprised. You know, I think the public deserves better than that. They really do. Like, our job is to serve and protect. And to, you know, part of being in law enforcement is using your imagination. Every time I did a security perimeter or did something, I would have to use my imagination. I wouldn't think, how would I secure this as law enforcement? I would think, how would I, if I were the bad guy, if I were the bad actor, how would I get in? And then I would reverse engineer it. Okay, if I can get in through here, I've got a hole. How do I plug that hole? So I think again, just based on what we're seeing, we don't know. It's not been verified. Just what we see through the shots, it's just parade barricades, which is like, it's just cardboard. It's wood that you can knock over, and bike rack. You're seeing it right now. There's the bike rack next to that officer. If that's all they put in place, well then yes, a vehicle is going to be able to get through that.
I want to point out here that the city in 2017, according to NOLA.com, had installed some mechanical barriers, basically some steel barriers in the French Quarter after an attack in France, a major ramming attack in France the year before. We also understand that there was this project, as I referenced earlier, to replace some of those older steel bollards in the areas like the French Quarter ahead of some of those events that are coming up, Evie. All of which is to say there are a number of questions still remaining about the security in place. There's also a number of questions about the events coming up. Obviously, tonight you've got the Sugar Bowl that is set to kick off later in the evening from the Superdome. That's not too far away from where this happened, just about a mile away from Bourbon Street. Evie, you've talked before about how sometimes those kinds of sites are a bit easier to secure, but obviously there will be an intense focus on the security posture heading into tonight's big college football game with thousands of people in from out of town for that event.
Look, it's all hands on deck. Everything I'm hearing is everybody's coming in from everywhere to help out. All the law enforcement entities, they're going to be working today. They're going to be going to the Sugar Bowl. So when you look at the Sugar Bowl, we're looking at two things you're trying to secure: the inner perimeter, the outer perimeter. Inner perimeter is the stadium itself. That's not a hard thing to secure. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's parts and components to it, but I have got a structure. It keeps people out. I designate where people are coming in. Where I decide people come in, I set up my magnetometers, my presence. I make sure all my other doors and entryways are locked. Nobody can get in. They are posted with police. And I mag and check people. And as people are coming in, I am making sure that they are clean. Also, prior to letting people in, they've checked the stadium itself. They've gone through it with dogs. They're looking for explosive devices. They're making sure that the stadium itself is clean, that nobody came in the day before, the night before, the week before, and left something, a device, a weapon. So you're going to check the event itself, the site structure itself, make sure it's clean. I've got a clean site. Good. Now I've got my police presence structured outside. Then I'm going to open the doors and I'm going to make sure the people coming in are clean and everybody inside my event is clean. That's phase one. The other phase, which is a little bit more loose and probably a little more difficult, throws you to deal with here, is the parking lot area. Let's not forget that outer perimeter. There are people there too. They're parking their vehicles. There are families. People sit sometimes and they hang out in their trucks and they will barbecue. They will do things. So you've also have a massive amount of people outside of the stadium. That's a little bit more trickier to secure because it's a bit more open. But again, fencing, structure, making sure there's police presence, that there's vehicle, that there are cars roaming up and down and patrolling. So that's the other part of the venue that you're going to have to secure as well. So you've got the site itself and then the outer perimeter of the site. We definitely don't want to forget that one. And you also want to think about, again, maybe the way my mind thinks just from security, not just weapons, not just cars, but, you want to think chemical, biological. Is somebody going to bring something in? Radiation. These are things you really want to think about. Often when I would secure sites, big stadiums, I would have elements outside of that stadium detecting for radiation, detecting for chemical, biological. You really have to think above and beyond. The traditional way of securing things is gone. It's done. We are done. We are in a new place, in a new phase, and we all have to catch up and make sure we are thinking ahead. The bad guy, the bad actors, they think ahead. They sit down and they put plans in place. They do their homework. They do their research. They are doing what they can. And, we really need to be ahead of the curve as much as possible. Do we have good aerial footage? Do they have drones up looking at what's going around in the area? Proactive. That's really the key. Catching this stuff before it happens. Once we're reactive, it's really, really hard. We see it here. Once in just something simple, using a vehicle as a weapon, how do you stop that vehicle? Do you know how hard that is to stop, even with police on the ground? Even if you engage and start shooting at that vehicle, like how difficult it is to actually get the person to stop. And then if, let's say, you strike the driver, they crash and who knows who else they're going to hurt. So you really want to think beyond and above. And I had hoped that with what happened at the German market, the Christmas market, that we would have been a little bit more on guard and on point. And, I think that now that this happened with New Orleans, everybody in our cities, in the United States, all these police chiefs and commissioners, they should be paying attention and thinking, I need to change the way I do things. I need to think beyond the traditional way of doing law enforcement. And I cannot wait for something to happen in my city and be surprised by it before I make those changes.
Evie Pompouris, former Secret Service Special Agent. Evie, we're glad to have your perspective and your analysis this morning. Thank you very much. I want to go back now to our NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent, Tom Winter, because, Tom, it sounds like some of your sources are suggesting that perhaps they may be getting closer to an identification of the driver here.
I think so, Hallie, and I think, not surprisingly, and it's probably the way it should work initially in an investigation, is that the investigation is ahead of what we know and what we're reporting, and I think that's very much the case here. And so I think that there's a definite consensus as to who they were engaged with last night, and they'll conduct their work from there. Specifically want to point out that we've now verified an image from the scene showing a late model white pickup truck with Texas license plates. So they're obviously keyed in onto the license plate. I referenced this with you earlier this morning, and really all the things that we've discussed are coming into view. Who this person is, the license plate, the vehicle, all that information, very helpful at this point. The FBI now saying on the record in a statement from our colleague, provided by our colleague Ken Delanian, that they are investigating this as an act of terrorism. They note that it was a vehicle ramming. The number of individuals who've been killed, obviously we know from New Orleans officials that number stands at 10. It's possible those numbers could change. We also know that the person who conducted this attack conducted it and was deceased after firing at 2 New Orleans police officers, or perhaps more police officers, but at least 2 were struck and are currently at the hospital in stable condition. And so this investigation is very much ongoing. There's active work that's being done, and we'll have to see where it goes with respect to the actual motive. Remember, as you well know, Hallie, terrorism covers a number of different things. It can be inspired or directed by a foreign terrorist organization, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, et cetera. It could also be something motivated by an individual who has an ideology closer to home, whether it be a hate against a specific community or group of individuals, a political cause. We've seen it all in the last year or two, and we've certainly seen, to Evie's point, these type of attacks, the vehicle ramming attacks, executed throughout the world. So everything we've been discussing this morning now all coming into focus. Obviously, they're moving forward with this investigation, and so I'm hopeful that the next update we get from law enforcement, we'll have some more information and hopefully can get a little bit closer to the motive. There's at least one possible IED, so an improvised explosive device. In English, Hallie, that just means something that somebody created at home that could have been an explosive, or it could have been an incendiary device designed to create some sort of large fire if triggered. Whether or not it was a device that actually could have gone off, whether it was designed as a hoax device to slow down law enforcement, whether it was something that the person just didn't have enough capability or know how to go off, or it didn't go off because they were involved in eventually hitting what appears to be kind of one of those mobile lifting platforms. Those are all questions that are obviously going to be known by people at the scene. They may still be investigating those things, so we just don't know yet. There are some indications this vehicle traveled several blocks, or at least one block, so I think then that goes back to the security question. Those questions will be answered in time, but it does appear that this was not something that happened just at the entrance of a security checkpoint, so I think that's important. Another thing that we're looking at is whether or not this individual was armed with a semi-automatic handgun, more of a pistol, to be not as technical, or whether they actually had a long gun on their person. That's information we're looking into as well, and hopefully we'll have some more clarity on that shortly.
Tom, you talk about the security posture here. It is reverberating not just in New Orleans ahead of the kickoff for the Sugar Bowl later on tonight, but also around the country. You look at, for example, the Rose Parade that is set to start really in just about 45 minutes from now out in Pasadena, California, ahead of the Rose Bowl later on tonight. And we have a statement now from the organizers saying that they stand in solidarity with the state of Louisiana during this difficult time, going on to talk about some of the security in place for the parade. It is a top-level federal event, they say. They have a hard shutdown of vehicles along the entire parade route, in addition to what they describe as very robust vehicle barriers at intersections, with more than 1,000 law enforcement working the parade and the game. And any other day, Tom, this would be fairly typical to have a security plan in place for an event like the Rose Bowl or the Rose Parade, but it becomes newly relevant today after what we saw this morning in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we published a story, I believe it was Monday evening on NBCNews.com, talking, and it was in a note that we sent around that came from a Department of Homeland Security compiled assessment for New Year's Eve. It was specific to New York and involved all the law enforcement agencies here, but they noted vehicle ramming attacks and the idea that this is something that's been out there. It's been talked about. There was the Christmas market attack in Germany. I referenced that earlier this morning when you and I were speaking. And so we've seen these type of incidents before. It's repeatedly referenced in terrorism propaganda, including some of more recent terrorism propaganda. But beyond that, even if you're not somebody who's a believer in ISIS as an example, It's well known for people that want to conduct attacks, no matter what your ideology is, that's something that you can do. So I'm not surprised that they're talking about that in California, and I think it's something that will be looked at closely here.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.